There is a joke in the Linux and open source world that has been repeated so many times it has almost lost its meaning. But like all good jokes, it contains a truth that is uncomfortable to ignore. The joke goes like this. Emacs is a great operating system, lacking only a decent text editor. If you've never used Emacs, this probably sounds absurd. If you have used it, you are already nodding. And if you have spent years inside it, you know the joke is not really a joke at all. Emacs is one of the oldest pieces of software still in active development on the planet. It predates Linux. It predates the internet as most people know it. It predates personal computers in the modern sense. And yet here it is, in 2025, with an active community, regular releases, and developers who would argue, seriously, without irony, that it is the most powerful text editing environment ever created. The story of how we got here is not just the story of a program. It is the story of a philosophy, a culture war, a religious schism, and one of the most consequential ideas in the history of computing. To understand where Emacs comes from, you need to go back to the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in the mid-1970s. This was a place unlike any other in the world at the time. The people working there were not just programmers in the conventional sense. They were hackers, in the original meaning of the word. People who believed that understanding a system deeply meant being able to modify it, improve it, reshape it to your will. The culture of the MIT AI lab was built around this idea. Software was meant to be shared, studied, and changed. Information wanted to be free, not in the cheap sense of the word, but in the sense of freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom to improve. The editor people used at the MIT AI lab was called TECO, Text Editor and Corrector. By modern standards, TECO was not so much an editor as it was a programming language that happened to manipulate text. It was arcane, cryptic, and deeply unintuitive. But it was powerful, and the hackers at MIT had developed macros, small programs that extended its behavior. A young programmer named Richard Stallman, along with Guy Steele and others, began collecting and organizing these macros into a coherent system. They called it Emacs, Editor Macros. The name tells you everything about what it was at the beginning. Not a standalone program, but a set of extensions on top of something else. What made this early Emacs different from just a collection of scripts was the social contract that Stallman attached to it. If you used Emacs, you were expected to share your improvements with the community. This was not enforced by a license, not yet. It was a moral expectation, a cultural norm. You take from the commons, you give back to the commons. It sounds simple. At the time, in the context of commercial software that was beginning to dominate the industry, it was radical. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Emacs spread and multiplied. Because the idea was simple and powerful, different people implemented it on different systems. There was Sign, there was Fine, there was Mints. There were dozens of programs that called themselves Emacs or Emacs-like. The name had become almost a concept rather than a specific piece of software. And Emacs was an extensible, self-documenting editor. That was the definition. What ran underneath could be anything. One of the most important of these implementations came from a man named James Gosling. Yes, that James Gosling, the same person who would later create the Java programming language. In 1981, Gosling wrote a version of Emacs in C that could run on Unix systems. It was called Gosling Emacs, and it was good. Stallman wanted to bring a proper Emacs to Unix as well, and initially he considered working with or building on what Gosling had created. But Gosling sold the rights to his implementation to a company called Unipress, which made it proprietary software. The door was closed. Stallman would have to start from scratch. What he built from that scratch became GNU Emacs, released in 1985. And GNU Emacs was not just another editor. It was the first program ever released under the GNU Project, the initiative Stallman had launched in 1983 with the goal of creating a completely free Unix-like operating system. Think about that for a moment. The first concrete output of the GNU Project, the project that would eventually give birth to the GPL, to GCC, to the entire foundation that Linux would later rest on, was a text editor. Not a compiler, not a kernel, not a system utility, a text editor. That tells you something about how central the act of writing and editing code was to this entire movement. GNU Emacs was written in C at its core, but the key decision that would define its entire future was the choice of Emacs Lisp as the extension language. Lisp is one of the oldest programming languages in existence, and it has properties that make it uniquely suited to this kind of system. In Emacs, almost everything you see and interact with is written in Emacs Lisp. The core C code handles the very low-level operations, but the editing commands, the modes, the interfaces, the entire personality of the program, all of it is Lisp, and all of it is accessible to you. You can open the source code of any function while you are using Emacs, read it, modify it, and reload it without restarting the program. The boundary between using software and writing software dissolves. This is not a feature. It is a philosophy made executable. The GPL, the new General Public License, was formalized largely because of the experience of distributing GNU Emacs. Stallman needed a legal instrument that would guarantee that the freedom to study, modify, and redistribute software could not be taken away by downstream recipients. The GPL was that instrument. It introduced the concept of copyleft. You can use this freely, but anything you build on top of it and distribute must also be free under the same terms. The license that governs the Linux kernel today, the license that underlies billions of devices and servers around the world, exists in the form it does because someone needed a way to protect a text editor. As GNU Emacs grew in popularity, a cultural conflict emerged that would come to define an entire generation of programmers. On one side, Emacs. On the other side, Vi, the text editor written by Bill Joy for BSD Unix. Vi was everything Emacs was not: small, fast, modal. It had a philosophy of doing one thing and doing it as well as possible, then getting out of the way. You did not live inside Vi. You dipped into it, made your changes, and returned to the shell. Emacs, by contrast, was a world you entered and never left. The editor war between these two camps became one of the first and most sustained culture wars in computing history. It was fought in newsgroups, in mailing lists, in conference hallways. It generated insults, manifestos, and a taxonomy of stereotypes that persists to this day. Emacs users, academics, idealists, people with large monitors and small keyboards. Vi users, pragmatists, minimalists, people who believe that a text editor should know its place. Neither side ever really won. Both sides produced extraordinary software. The war continues in a different form today, with NeoVim and VSCode playing the roles once held by VI and Emacs, but the underlying tension, minimalism versus extensibility, tools versus environments, is exactly the same argument with different fonts. Inside the Emacs world itself, a different kind of conflict was brewing in the early 1990s. A company called Lucid Inc. was building a commercial software product and needed a customized version of Emacs for their development environment. They created a fork called Lucid Emacs, and for a while, they tried to work with the GNU Emacs team to merge their changes back upstream. It did not work. The two codebases diverged too far, the development philosophies clashed, and the personalities involved did not help. Lucid Emacs became XEmacs, and for years there were two serious, incompatible versions of Emacs competing with each other. The XEmacs community, which included developers like Jamie Zawinski, was in many ways more innovative and more user-friendly than GNU Emacs during this period. Features that XEmacs pioneered took years to make it into GNU Emacs. But the fork also fragmented the community, divided attention, and created a situation where neither version could fully benefit from the work being done on the other. Eventually, XEmacs lost momentum. GNU Emacs absorbed many of the lessons XEmacs had taught, accelerated its own development, and the schism gradually became a historical footnote rather than an active battlefield. But it left a mark. The Emacs community learned something about the cost of division that other open-source projects would have to learn again and again in the years to come. By the 2000s, Emacs was beginning to look old. The world of software development was changing rapidly. Integrated development environments like Eclipse and IntelliJ IDEA offered graphical interfaces, integrated debuggers, refactoring tools, and a level of language-aware assistance that a keyboard-driven editor from the 1980s could not easily match. Then came TextMate on the Mac, which showed that a text editor could be beautiful and modern without being an IDE. And then came the decade of VSCode, which essentially reset everyone's expectations about what a general-purpose editor should be able to do. For a while, it genuinely seemed possible that Emacs would follow the path of so many old tools into a kind of living museum state, maintained, respected, but no longer really part of the conversation. That is not what happened. Instead, something interesting occurred. A new generation of developers discovered Emacs not as an old tool they needed to learn, but as a platform they wanted to inhabit. Distributions like Spacemacs and later Doom Emacs made Emacs dramatically more accessible to people coming from modern editors. They provided sane defaults, beautiful themes, good documentation, and crucially, evil mode, which brought Vim key bindings into Emacs. Evil mode was either a compromise or a synthesis, depending on your perspective. For the old guard, it was heresy. For thousands of new users, it was the bridge that made Emacs approachable without asking them to abandon muscle memory they had spent years building. And once they were inside Emacs, they found things that no other editor offered. Org mode is probably the single most important piece of software ever written in Emacs Lisp, and it deserves to be mentioned specifically. It began as a tool for outlining and note-taking, but it grew into something that has no real equivalent anywhere else. With org mode, you can manage your tasks, write and execute code inline, export documents to PDF, HTML, and LaTeX, track habits, maintain a personal wiki, and do literate programming, mixing code and prose in a document where both are executable and readable. People have built entire life management systems inside org mode. Academics write their papers in it. Developers manage their projects in it. It is, to put it simply, one of those pieces of software that changes how you think about what a document is and what a computer is for. Magit is another example that gets mentioned whenever someone asks why experienced developers still use Emacs. Magit is a Git interface built inside Emacs, and it is routinely described by people who use it as the best Git interface in existence, better than any standalone GUI client, better than the terminal. This is not nostalgia talking. It is a functional claim that many developers who have used both will defend seriously. GNU Emacs version 29 brought native compilation through libgcc JIT, which means Emacs Lisp can now be compiled to native machine code rather than interpreted, resulting in performance improvements that were genuinely significant. Tree sitter integration brought proper syntax parsing to a level that was previously only available in dedicated language servers. The editor that people were writing off as obsolete in 2010 is in 2025 technically more capable than it has ever been. So what does all of this mean? Why does a text editor that began as a collection of macros at the MIT AI lab in 1976 still matter? The answer is not really about the software itself. It is about what the software represents. In a world where the tools we use to write code are increasingly hosted in the cloud, dependent on subscriptions, monitored by their creators, and designed to make us productive according to someone else's definition of that word, Emacs is the opposite. It is software that you own completely. You can read every line of it. You can change every behavior. You can understand it at any level of depth you choose to go to. It does not decide what you need. You decide what you need, and then you make it do that. There is a reason the joke exists. The joke about Emacs being an operating system is funny because it is slightly absurd, but it points at something true. Emacs is not trying to be a tool that fits neatly into your workflow. It is trying to be the workflow. It is trying to be the environment inside which everything else happens. That ambition has frustrated users for 50 years. It has also inspired some of the most dedicated and creative developers in the history of computing. Whether that trade-off makes sense for you is a question only you can answer. But dismissing it without understanding it would be a mistake. Because what Emacs really is, underneath all the jokes and the key bindings and the Lisp and the decades of accumulated complexity, is an argument about what software should be, who it should serve, and what it means for a tool to truly belong to the person using it. That argument started in 1976. It has not been resolved. And as long as it has not been resolved, Emacs will still be here making the case. See you in the next video, and may Linux be with you.